The clinking of cutlery against ceramic was the only sound that dared to interrupt the comfortable silence of their Tuesday evening dinner. It was a familiar rhythm, the soundtrack to a life Claire had meticulously built with Mark over 17 years. A life of shared dreams, mortgage payments, and the beautiful, chaotic symphony of raising their son, Leo. Mark was halfway through a story about a difficult client, his hands gesturing animatedly, his face earnest. He was a good man, a stable and loving husband, and Claire felt a familiar surge of affection as she watched him. It was a simple, perfect moment. And then, it wasn't. Leo, who had been pushing a lone pea around his plate with his fork, leaned in close to her. His voice was a bare whisper, a conspiratorial puff of air against her ear that sent a chill down her spine, completely at odds with the warmth of the dining room. "He has 2 phones." Claire blinked. The words didn't register at first. They were nonsense, a child's strange observation. She glanced at Leo, whose 14-year-old face was a mask of serious gravity. He looked from her to his father and then back again, his eyes wide with a meaning she couldn't yet decipher. She tried to offer a small, reassuring smile, but it felt stiff on her lips. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" she whispered back, her voice barely audible over Mark's narrative about quarterly reports. Leo just shook his head slightly, his gaze dropping back to his plate. He didn't say another word. The conversation was over, but for Claire, it was just beginning. The 3 little words echoed in her mind, morphing from a strange comment into a sharp, pointed question. 2 phones? Why would Mark have 2 phones? He had his work phone and his personal phone, both of which were often on the kitchen counter, charging side by side. It was an open, transparent part of their lives. There was no third phone. There couldn't be. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She tried to focus on Mark, who had now moved on to complaining about the new coffee machine at the office. He was laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way she adored. It was the face of the man she knew, the man she trusted implicitly. The idea that he could be hiding something felt like a betrayal not just of him, but of her own judgment. She was being ridiculous, letting a child's comment unravel her. But Leo wasn't a little boy anymore. He was observant, quiet, and possessed a teenager's sharp instinct for things that were out of place. He wouldn't have said it without a reason. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Claire nodded and smiled, her mind a frantic storm of possibilities. Was it a secret work project? Some surprise he was planning for her? Her birthday was 2 months away. A secret phone seemed like an unnecessarily elaborate way to plan a party. Each innocent explanation she concocted felt thin, unconvincing. Her mind, against her will, drifted to darker territories. The places a mind goes when a seed of doubt has been planted. After dinner, as Mark and Leo cleared the table, their usual routine, Claire found herself lingering by the coat rack in the hallway. Mark's jacket hung there, a familiar navy peacoat he wore every day. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. It felt like a violation, a step into a territory she had never entered in their entire marriage. They didn't keep secrets. They didn't check each other's pockets. Her fingers brushed against the coarse wool, her breath catching in her throat. This was insane. She was about to search her husband's coat based on a cryptic whisper from their son. She pulled her hand back, but Leo's serious face flashed in her mind. He wasn't playing a game. He was warning her. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she plunged her hand into the inner pocket. For a moment, she felt nothing but the smooth lining. Relief, potent and immediate, washed over her. She was a fool. She was about to pull her hand out and go to the kitchen to apologize for her silent suspicion. But then her fingertips brushed against something small and sharp. It wasn't a phone. It was smaller. A tiny piece of plastic tucked deep into the corner of the pocket's seam, almost hidden. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she drew it out. It sat in the palm of her hand, stark and damning under the dim hallway light. It wasn't a phone, but it was the heart of one. A second SIM card. The tiny piece of plastic felt immense in Claire's hand, its weight magnified by the implications it carried. It was a key, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it unlocked a door she never wanted to open. A second SIM card. Not a second phone, as Leo had thought, but something far more insidious, easier to hide. A man with a second phone could be careless. A man with a second SIM card was deliberate. He was careful. Her first instinct was to march into the kitchen, hold it up, and demand an explanation. To watch his face as the comfortable facade of their evening shattered. But what would she say? "Leo told me you have 2 phones, so I searched your coat and found this?" The accusation felt clumsy. The act of searching a confession of her own distrust. It would put her on the defensive, make her the villain who had snooped, who had doubted. Mark was clever. He could spin a story, create a plausible reason about a work trip, a temporary number for a client in another country. He could make her feel foolish and paranoid. And what if by some miracle he was telling the truth? The damage would be done. The trust, once breached by her actions, would never be fully repaired. She couldn't confront him. Not yet. Claire slipped the SIM card into her own pocket, her fingers closing around it as if protecting a fragile, terrible secret. She walked back into the kitchen, her movements feeling robotic. Mark was laughing at something Leo had said, and he looked up at her, his smile wide and genuine. "You were gone for a minute there, honey. Everything okay?" "Fine," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly normal. "Just felt a draft from the hallway." The lie came so easily it scared her. In 17 years of marriage, she could count the number of times she'd lied to Mark on one hand. Now, it seemed, she was learning a new skill. That night, for the first time in years, Claire lay awake long after Mark's breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. She lay on her side, facing away from him, the warmth of his body a familiar comfort that now felt like a scorching brand. Every inch of her was tense, listening. Who was this man beside her? Was he the same man who held her hand during the terrifying hours of Leo's birth? The man who cried with her when her mother passed away? Or was that just one version of him, the version he chose to show her? The SIM card was a physical manifestation of a second life, a life that didn't include her. A life he accessed by switching a tiny chip inside a hidden phone. Her mind raced with scenarios, each one more painful than the last. Another woman was the most obvious, the most cliché, the most devastating. Was he whispering to someone else in the dead of night? Sending texts filled with words he once reserved for her? The thought was a physical blow, winding her, leaving her breathless in the silent darkness of her own bedroom. She thought about his recent behavior. Had there been signs? He'd been working late more often, but that was common in his line of work during the end of the quarter. He'd been more protective of his phone, but she'd dismissed it as a response to Leo constantly borrowing it to play games. Were these legitimate facts, or were they clues she had been too blind, too trusting, to see? Her memory became a minefield, every recent interaction re-examined under a harsh new light. That boys' weekend 2 months ago. The credit card bill with a charge from a restaurant she didn't recognize, which he'd explained away as a business lunch. Each memory was now tainted, suspect. By the time the first gray light of dawn seeped through the blinds, Claire had made a decision. A confrontation without proof would lead to denial and gaslighting. She needed to know what she was dealing with before she blew up her world. She needed to know what secrets that little piece of plastic held. She slipped out of bed, her feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. In the study, she rummaged through a drawer filled with old electronics, a tangle of obsolete chargers, a cracked MP3 player, and finally, what she was looking for. An old smartphone she'd replaced years ago but hadn't had the heart to throw away. It was dead, of course. She found a compatible charger and plugged it in, watching as the screen flickered to life, a relic from a more innocent time. Her plan was simple, and it terrified her. She would wait for Mark to leave for work. She would take the old phone, insert the secret SIM, and power it on. She would step through the door he had opened and see what was on the other side. Her hand trembled as she held the old phone. She was no longer just a wife with a suspicion. She was becoming a detective in the ruins of her own life. The morning was a masterclass in deception. Claire moved through the familiar choreography of their daily routine, making coffee, packing Leo's lunch, reminding Mark about his dental appointment next week, with a hollow, aching precision. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. Every smile a betrayal of the cold knot of dread in her stomach. Mark was oblivious, a man living in the sunlit portion of his life, completely unaware of the storm gathering just out of sight. He kissed her goodbye at the door, a casual, familiar gesture that felt alien and insulting. "Have a good day," he said, his voice full of the easy confidence of a man who believes his world is secure. Claire watched him walk to his car, her hand clutching the old dead phone in her pocket, and whispered, "You too," to his retreating back. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, she closed the door, her carefully constructed composure crumbling like a dam. She leaned against the wood, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was silent, but her mind was screaming. This was it, the point of no return. With trembling hands, she retrieved the old phone. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Leo had uttered those fateful words just last night. It felt like a lifetime ago. Using a paperclip, she painstakingly ejected the SIM tray from the old device. Her fingers, usually so steady, fumbled as she picked up the secret SIM card. It was so small, so insignificant, Yet it held the power to detonate her life. She placed it in the tray, slid it home, and held her breath as she pressed the power button. The screen flickered, an old, forgotten logo appearing for a moment before the operating system booted up. It felt ancient, slow. Every second of loading time was a fresh wave of anxiety. What would she find? A phone wiped clean? A single cryptic contact? Or the floodgates of a secret life? The phone finally chimed to life, connecting to the network. And then it began. A cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Dozens of them, a torrent of messages from a single contact, all sent within the last few days. The sheer volume was staggering. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The other woman. The affair, laid bare in a stream of digital text. The contact name was simple. Anna. Claire's finger hovered over the notification bar, a tremor running through her arm. She tapped and the messaging app opened, revealing a conversation thread that stretched back months. She started scrolling up, her eyes scanning the most recent messages first. But they weren't what she expected. They weren't love notes or clandestine plans. They were desperate. Anna. Mark, please. You have to answer. The fever is back. Anna. I tried calling the main number. Did you block me? Don't do this to us. Anna. The pharmacy won't give me any more until the bill is paid. It's just sitting there. Please, I'm begging you. Anna. She keeps asking for you. What am I supposed to tell her? Claire's blood ran cold. This wasn't the language of a mistress. It was the language of panic, of a woman in crisis. She keeps asking for you. A child. There was a child involved. Her mind reeled. Was this some kind of blackmail? A shakedown? Was Mark the victim here? A sliver of desperate hope wormed its way through her panic. Maybe there was an explanation. A terrible, messy one, but one that didn't involve a fundamental betrayal of their vows. Then she scrolled further up, past the frantic messages of the last few days, into the weeks before. The tone was different here. More routine. More domestic. Anna. Sophie got an A on her spelling test. She was so proud she made me promise to tell you right away. Anna. Picture attached, her new coat you sent. She loves it. Says she looks like a princess. Claire's finger froze on the screen. Picture attached. With a sense of impending doom, she tapped on the image file. It loaded slowly, resolving line by line on the old phone's screen. It was a photo of a little girl no older than 6 or 7, beaming with a gap-toothed smile. She was wearing a bright pink winter coat, her face framed by a fluffy hood. She was adorable, and her eyes, they were Mark's. It was undeniable. The same shape, the same warm, hazel color, the same slight crinkle at the corners when she smiled. It was like looking at a childhood photo of her own husband. Claire dropped the phone as if it had burned her. It clattered onto the table, the screen remaining lit, the smiling face of the little girl staring up at the ceiling. The air was sucked from her lungs. This was so much worse than an affair. An affair was a demolition. This was the discovery of a parallel universe. For years, Mark hadn't just been her husband. He had been a husband and a father twice over. He had a whole other family, a secret daughter. The life she had, the family she had built, the 17 years of shared history. It was all a lie. Not just a lie, but a shared lie. He had a home with her, and he had a home with them. He had a child with her, and a child with this other woman. Her mind couldn't grasp the logistics, the sheer scale of the deception, the energy it must have taken, the constant vigilance. She looked at the smiling girl on the screen. Sophie. Her name was Sophie. She was real, and she was Mark's daughter. Her husband, the stable, loving, predictable man she thought she knew, was a stranger, and Claire had just opened the door to his secret, other life. For a long time, Claire couldn't move. She sat frozen at the kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in on her, a stark contrast to the roaring chaos in her mind. The image of the little girl, Sophie, was seared into her brain. Mark's eyes, Mark's smile, a ghost of him, living in a world Claire never knew existed. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost surreal. It wasn't just a secret. It was a completely separate reality he had constructed alongside their own. Slowly, as if moving through water, she reached for the phone again. The initial explosive shock began to subside, replaced by a chilling, methodical need for information. She wasn't just a grieving wife anymore. She was an archaeologist, and the ruins of her marriage were laid out before her. She had to understand the scope of the city buried beneath her feet, She forced herself to scroll, to read. She went back months, then years. The SIM card held a history that stretched back almost a decade. A decade. Leo was 4 years old when this started. The thought made her physically ill. For 10 years, Mark had been living a double life, shuttling between his two families, his two children. He had been there for Leo's first day of school, and he had apparently been there for Sophie's too. He had comforted Claire through a miscarriage 5 years ago, all while another woman was raising his daughter. The depth of the duplicity was unfathomable. The messages painted a bleak, detailed picture. Anna was not a glamorous mistress. She was a woman struggling to make ends meet, her life seemingly revolving around her daughter and her precarious dependence on Mark. The conversation was a litany of household needs, school expenses, and doctor's visits. It was a second mortgage, a second set of parental responsibilities Mark had been servicing in secret. There were no "I love yous," no romantic getaways. The language was transactional, weary. It was the conversation of a partnership that had long since lost its shine, if it ever had one. It was the business of co-parenting. Mark, the money has been transferred. That needs to last you until the 15th. Anna, it won't. The rent went up. I told you this. Mark, then figure it out, Anna. I'm doing the best I can. Claire felt a strange, bitter pang of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but a recognition of shared struggle. Here was another woman, tied to the same man, experiencing a different, but equally frustrating version of him. While Claire had the comfort of a shared home and public legitimacy, Anna had the constant, grinding anxiety of financial insecurity, her and her daughter's well-being contingent on the mood and means of a man who kept them in the shadows. And then there was Sophie. Woven throughout the financial disputes were glimpses of a child's life, videos of a school play, audio clips of her singing a nursery rhyme off-key, a picture of a lost tooth. Mark was a father to this girl. He was receiving the daily updates, the small, precious moments that make up a childhood. Moments he had shared with Claire about Leo, all while knowing he was getting a second set, a secret collection of memories he kept locked away. He had experienced the joy of 2 children growing up, while Claire had only been allowed to know one. He had stolen a sister from Leo, and a daughter from himself in a way. The most recent messages about the fever were the most disturbing. Claire scrolled back to them, her newfound knowledge casting them in an even more sinister light. Anna, the pharmacy won't give me any more until the bill is paid. It's just sitting there. Please, I'm begging you. A sick child. His sick child. And he was letting her mother beg for medicine. Claire looked at the timestamp. The message was from 2 days ago. 2 days while Mark had been laughing about coffee machines and complaining about clients. His other daughter was sick and her mother was panicking. The cold resolve in Claire's veins hardened into steel. The grief was still there. A vast, black ocean inside her. But on the surface of that ocean, anger was now forging a weapon. This wasn't just about a betrayal of their marriage anymore. This was about a fundamental flaw in his character, a cruelty she had never imagined he possessed. To deny a sick child medicine over a bill? Who was this man? She thought of Leo, safe in his room upstairs, surrounded by books and video games, wanting for nothing. She thought of his innocent whisper at the dinner table, the act that had unknowingly pulled the pin on this grenade. He deserved better than a father who was a phantom in another child's life. And this little girl, Sophie, with her father's eyes, deserved better than a father who treated her health like a line item on a budget. Claire stood up. The time for silent investigation was over. Confrontation was inevitable, but she wouldn't scream and she wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would be calm. She would be methodical. She would present the evidence, just as she had uncovered it. She placed the old phone on the kitchen counter, screen facing up, the picture of Sophie's smiling face illuminated. She placed the second SIM card next to it, like a piece of evidence at a trial. The trial of Mark, her husband. She would let these 2 objects speak for her. And then, she would watch as the 2 halves of his life finally, violently, collided. All she had to do now was wait for him to come home. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock on the wall a hammer blow against the fragile silence. Claire didn't clean, she didn't busy herself. She simply sat at the kitchen table, a silent sentinel watching over the artifacts of her husband's secret life. The phone, with its glowing image of a smiling, gap-toothed girl, and the tiny SIM card beside it. When she heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening, her heart didn't leap. It settled into a heavy, cold stone in her chest. The moment had arrived. "Claire, I'm home!" Mark's voice echoed through the house, cheerful and oblivious. The sound of his footsteps grew closer, the ordinary rhythm of his arrival now a drumbeat of impending doom. He appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, shrugging off his coat, a smile on his face that died the instant he saw her. He saw her first, her face a pale, unreadable mask. Then his eyes followed her gaze down to the table. He froze. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy gray pallor. Recognition, pure and absolute, flickered in his eyes, followed by a wave of panic so profound it was visible, a physical tremor that ran through his body. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Claire broke the silence. Her voice was unnervingly calm, devoid of the hysteria he might have expected. It was the voice of a judge, not a victim. "I believe her name is Sophie," she said. The name, spoken aloud in their kitchen, seemed to shatter the air between them. It was a name that did not belong here, in this life. Mark flinched as if struck. "Claire, what is this?" he stammered, his hand gesturing vaguely toward the table, his eyes wide with a desperate, cornered fear. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through his attempt at denial. "Don't you dare pretend you don't know what this is. I know about Anna. I know about your daughter. I know you've had a second family for 10 years. Mark collapsed onto a nearby chair, his head in his hands. The fight went out of him completely, replaced by a ragged, guttural sob. "Claire, I'm so sorry," he mumbled into his palms. "I was going to tell you. So many times I was going to tell you." "Were you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air, sharp and cold. "Were you going to tell me? Or were you just going to keep paying the bills? Keeping your two lives neatly separated? A little girl with your eyes, Mark. A sister our son never knew he had. It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, his voice thick with a self-pity that made Claire's stomach turn. "It was a mistake, a long time ago. One night. And then Anna called me. She was pregnant, and I panicked. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could provide for them without destroying this, without destroying us. Protecting us?" Claire laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. "You call this protection? You call a decade of lies protection?" Leo whispered to me at dinner, Mark. He said, "He has 2 phones. Your son knew something was wrong. Your own son. You didn't protect him. You forced him to live in a house with a father who was a ghost, a liar." She stood up and pushed the old phone across the table toward him. The screen was still lit, showing the frantic messages from Anna. "This isn't just about us anymore," she said, her voice dropping, gaining a new, harder edge. "Her fever is back. Did you know? Anna's been begging you for 2 days. The pharmacy won't give her the medicine. Your daughter is sick, and you've been ignoring her mother's calls." That finally seemed to pierce through his fog of personal ruin. He looked at the messages, his face contorting in a new kind of horror. It was one thing to be caught in a lie, another to be confronted with its immediate, cruel consequences. "No, I didn't. I turned the phone off. I was afraid you'd hear it." "You were afraid I'd hear it," Claire repeated, the words dripping with contempt. "So you left your sick child without medicine to save yourself from a difficult conversation." She walked to the hallway and picked up the coat he had just taken off. She walked back and threw it at him. "Get out." "Claire, please," he begged, looking up at her, his face a mess of tears and shame. "We can talk about this. We can fix this." "No," she said, her voice final. "We can't fix this tonight. What you are going to do is you are going to leave this house. You're going to turn that phone back on, and you are going to handle your responsibilities. You are going to make sure your daughter gets the medicine she needs. The part of your life you kept hidden from us is now the only part you need to worry about. Go." He stared at her, seeing for the first time not the wife he had deceived, but the woman he had created in the wake of his deceit. He slowly, shakily, got to his feet. He took his coat, didn't look at her again, and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer fragile. It was shattered. Claire stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she knew. Ahead of her was a conversation with Leo she couldn't begin to imagine. Ahead of her was a future that was a vast, terrifying unknown. But in that moment, standing in the ruins, she felt something she hadn't felt in days, the solid ground of truth beneath her feet. The lie was over. And in its place, however painful, a new, honest life could finally begin. A life built on secrets is a house of cards, destined to fall. It reminds us that true strength isn't found in hiding our mistakes, but in facing them, and that the deepest betrayals often come not from a lack of love, but from a lack of courage. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope and the courage to face their own truth.